Ayurvedic Institute of Technology and its Department of Engineering Sciences. And this webinar series are inspired by the motivation given to us by Dr. D.Y. Patil, our founder chancellor, and the visionary leadership provided by our beloved Dr. Vijay D. Patil, sir, the current chancellor of the Dr. D.Y. Patil deemed to be university. So it gives us great pleasure to come with you with one more webinar that will disseminate information and knowledge about the current crisis and which are very useful in many general areas in our life. And today we have come with something very useful from the domain of physics. And I would like to tell you about what this topic will be. And the webinar talk will be based on recent trends in development of sensors using nanotechnology and innovative approaches to sense COVID-19. So basically the abstract that reads as follows. It is science and technology that has helped us improve the quality of human life, but illnesses and diseases are always persisting due to hazardous gases and subsequent pollution, newly mutated viruses, food adulteration, stress and anxiety due to work pressure. And these are the worrying factors that contribute to recurrence of diseases like cancer. Then we have genetic disorders, respiratory disorders, skin problems, diabetes, and so many other lifestyle diseases. So what is the cure for this? Now, scientists and resource persons are constantly working on this. So it is essential to identify such hazards. What are these pollutants, and work towards making them less harmful for our environment as well as for mankind. And one such a method is through chemical sensors and biosensors based on nanomaterials and nanotechnology. Now, which are also called nanosensors, and they have tremendous demand in the sensor market and technology. And due to its unique specificity or electivity, their quick and fast performance, low cost, simple operation, and simple circuitry. So in this webinar, we will see some novel approaches to detect COVID-19. And this webinar is going to be conducted. The speaker is going to be Dr. Sandeep Dhoble. He is an assistant professor in RAIT. It is my proud privilege. It gives me great pleasure to introduce this very talented assistant professor who has achieved a lot in his career. So he's currently working on applications of nanomaterials for chemical and biological sensing and energy application. His research area is based on modeling and simulations of sensing devices using COMSOL multiphysics. Dr. Dhoble has a postgraduate degree from Fergusson College, Pune in physics, and he obtained his PhD degree from the University of Pune in 2014. And Dr. Dhoble was awarded the prestigious Eiffel Fellowship instituted by the French government in 2011-12, and Dr. Dhoble worked in the University of Rouen during the Eiffel Fellowship program in various capacities, contributing to research areas in that country. And he worked on spectroscopic tools, and he has also written in many research journals of quality, prestigious journals. He has contributed to the research in many different media and platforms. And so it's my proud pleasure to invite Dr. Dhoble to deliver his talk on recent trends in development of sensors using nanotechnology and innovative approaches to sense COVID-19. So over to you, Dr. Dhoble. I request you to take over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shenoy ma'am, for such a nice introduction. Really, you have explained introduction part about this topic very nicely. So I would like to thank you specially for this. Also, I would like to thank our principal sir, Dr. Mukesh Patil, and our HOD, Dr. Arpita Pal Chaudhary, has given me this opportunity to present my work. So let me share my slides. So in today's topic, basically we are going to see the approaches in recent sensing technologies using nanomaterials, and also we are going to see how we can uh, find out or detect a COVID-19 with innovative uh, strategies, which are very, I can say, advantages than the existing strategies. So we are also going to see what are the different strategies that we are using nowadays, and how can we come over the challenges which we are getting in that strategy. So, outline of our webinar will be like this. First, I will introduce about the introduction about nanomaterials, since these nanomaterials or nanotechnology is very useful for sensing application due to its promising properties towards the sensing applications. Then I will just explain about the few properties which are really important in the view of the sensing. That is our topic for today's webinar. Then we will see what are the recent trends in chemical sensors or gas sensors nowadays researchers are performing. And also we are going to see a biosensor, glucose sensor. So these two topics are basically my expertise. So I have worked a lot on these topics. And finally, we are going to see how we can approach innovatively this COVID-19 virus, which is, I can say, a most problematic situation nowadays. So let us start with the introduction about nanotechnology. So this term nanotechnology or concept of miniaturization of the bodies has been explained by a very renowned scientist and physicist in 1959, Richard Feynman. So he also won the Nobel Prize in quantum electrodynamics. So the title of his seminar was There is a plenty of room at the bottom, an invitation to enter new fields of physics. So the meaning of this first sentence, there is a plenty of the room at the bottom, is nothing but so he has explained, if we are using a large bodies for our applications or for our technology, if why not if we take a very small part of that body, and by using that small part of body, which will have a capacity to do extraordinary things due to their extraordinary property. So he has given an example of a metal pin. So he said that if we have a tip of this metal pin, there are few number of atoms present on this metal tip, and that few number of atoms, if I utilize for our application, we can store a number of encyclopedia journals on that small tip. So in that time, it was 1959, so early stage for development of this miniaturization of the technology. So that time nobody was recognized this concepts. He has also given concept of tiny machines, that he said if we make a very small machines that can work or that can operate to in medical fields, so for doctors, which was not possible that time, so that can be done also. But it was not recognized that time because it was early stage of development. After 40 years, it was found that this can be utilized, it can be realized, or it can be a real technology that can be uh, used by using very small bodies. So nowadays in market, we can see a very small chip of a memory card which is having 1 terabyte memory size. So if I consider 1 terabyte, and if we compare the concept that this Feynman has introduced, that we can store a number of thousand number of journals or journal papers on a small tip, as compared to this 1 terabyte, is very, very huge. So it is only possible due to this nanotechnology. Now, just I want to introduce about what do you mean by nano. So if you see here scale, and starting with water molecule, then we have glucose antibodies up to a tennis ball. The size of your water molecule is zero point 0.1 nanometer, whereas glucose molecule is having 1 nanometer. Then antibodies is 10 nanometer, and such way that if I consider or if I compare a tennis ball, size of tennis ball is 100 mm, that is 10 centimeter. See, now with naked eyes, we can easily see a tennis ball. But if I want to see the particles which are having 1 nanometer, 10 nanometer, or 100 nanometer with naked eyes or by using optical microscope that normally we are using in our chemistry lab or biology lab or botanical labs, it is not possible. Why it is not possible? Because by using these optical microscopes, we can see the bodies with size of 1 micrometer or 10 micrometer and more than that, but not less than that due to a wavelength of light. So wavelength of visible light is up to a 550 nanometer, or average wavelength is suppose 5500 angstrom. So 5500 angstrom, which is much higher than the size, that is 1 nanometer, 200 nanometer. So we require some another technology, or we require electronic microscope where we are using beam of electron with very smaller wavelengths. And if this wavelength is comparable with this dimension, we can easily see this nanoparticle. So nowadays we have electron microscopes or field effect electron microscope or atomic force microscopy, then scanning telemetry microscopy. All these are advanced tools are nowadays using to detect this nanoparticle. So this is about the size of the nanoparticles. Now, if we see a nano in mathematical form, 10 to the power minus 9 is called as a nano, and 10 to the power minus 6 is called a micro. Now, since we are talking about the size, I will just consider in meters or dimension of the length. So if something is in micrometer, if I take a hair, the size of hair is of the order of few micrometers. So see, micrometer means 10 to the power minus 6. And nano, if I compare with this micro, it is 1,000 times lesser than your micro. So hair is having size of micrometer, and diameter of the hair is having size of the micrometer. And if I reduce the size by 1,000 times smaller, I will get the nano. So with naked eyes, or you will get idea that how small this particle is and what will happen to their properties. That also we are going to see. So if I just focus on this 1 nanometer to 100 nanometer, okay, so in between this range, we are normally studying these bodies. So here you can say different particles like CNTs and graphenes, they are normally comes under these nanoparticles, or there are so many metal oxides or metals, nanoparticles, which are normally used to study this or comes under this nanotechnology, and their properties are completely different, which we are using for our application. Then, yes, I told you nano means what? 10 to the power minus 9. So when dimension is of the order of 1 nanometer to 100 nanometer, we are calling it as a nanobody or nanoparticles or nanomaterial. So here we have different scanning electron micro. So by using electron beam, we found out these images of the nanoparticles. So here, if you see this bar, it's a scale of 100 nanometer or 500 nanometer here at the right hand side. If you see or compare this size with this particle, you will get idea what dimension of this nanoparticle. Okay, so here we are having different morphologies. So we have nanospheres or cubes or triangular shapes, or some wire shaped structures or nanorods that we will get by using different techniques that we can use to synthesize the materials. Now we have to see why these nanomaterials, are having very important role in technology or in sensing application. So the first property of this nanoparticle is surface to volume ratio. So what do you mean by surface to volume ratio? It is very easy to understand. If I take an example of, suppose our particle is having a shape of sphere. Now surface area of sphere is can be given by 4 pi r square, and if I find out volume, it is 4 pi 3 pi r cube. If I take ratios of surface area and volume, I will get SVR, that is surface to volume ratio, is simply 3 by r, or I can say the surface to volume ratio is inversely proportional to the radius. Okay, so it is normally related to the size. If radius is small, your particle size is small. If radius is large, your particle size is very your surface to volume ratio will be very small. Now, if I consider this r, right, radius, if it is of the order of, let us say, 1 centimeter, that is 10 to the power minus 2 meter. Now we are talking about, let us say, comparison in one scale, so I am considering here meter. If I find out the surface to volume ratio of 1 centimeter, I will get this SVR, it is 300, because 3 upon 10 to the power minus 2, that means 300. Okay, so this ratio I am getting, suppose on my particle size is of the order of 1 centimeter. But if my particle size is of the order of nanometer, that is 10 to the power minus 9, I will get the SVR is equal to 3 into 10 to the power 9. Now see here, just remember this formula or try to understand this formula. Surface upon area, I am getting very high if my particle size is very small. Okay, so just by mathematical term, I can simply say this my surface area is really very high as compared to the volume of this particle. Now, what is use or what is meaning of it that I will just explain. If your surface area is very high as compared to your volume of the particle or size of your particle, what happens? The most of the atoms in that scenario are present on the surface. So when number of atoms are present on the surface of the nanoparticle, most of the atoms are becomes very active or they will take part in your reaction. If I'm using your nanoparticle in sensing mechanism, most of the atoms will try to make interaction with the gases or any physical quantity or biological quantity. So almost all the atoms will take part in this chemical reaction and you will get very good sensitivity by using this particle. What happens is when your particles are more on the surface energy of this nanoparticle is very high and it becomes very active, and this activeness is basically due to very high surface energy. And this surface energy is very important in catalyst application that we can use in photocatalysis or in catalyst reactions in the chemistry, and also we can use it for, most probably we can use this, or this is a key to use these nanomaterials for sensing applications. Also, it is found that if your particle size or surface to volume ratio is very high, the defect, which is the vacancies, are forming on the surface is also very high. If vacancies on the surface is also very high, this surface is electrically very unstable. So if surface is electrically very unstable, it will try to get stabilized. And for stabilizing the surface, it will interact with the surrounding quantities or entities that can be a gases or chemical quantities or biological quantities. So these vacancies are forming basically unsaturated covalent bonds, and these are again giving very good response for any sensing entity. Then another property which is very useful in sensing system, which is called as the blue sheet. So what happened here is, so here at left hand side we have an example of gold nanoparticles. So if in bulk form or normal day life, if we see gold, its color is yellow. But if I take size, okay, in nano region, you can say that the size of the nanoparticle will give change in color, and this is only possible due to this phenomenon which is called as a blue shift. So this concept of blue shift I can explain by the semiconductor nature, so you will get the idea. So now see here, when particle size is very small, this gold becomes reddish, and particle size is larger, but it is again in nano form, it becomes a purple. So this applications or these different colors you can use for different optical sensors, and it is very sensitive for optical sensing applications and colorimetric applications. So what do you mean by blue shift? I will just explain you. What happens is, so if I take a semiconductor or metal oxides, we have band structure. So in band structure, conduction band and valence band are separated by some forbidden energy gap, which is called as a band gap. Okay, so when I reduce the particle size, the number of atoms will decrease. The number of atoms, if number of atoms decrease, energy density states with respect to electrons will also decrease, and you will get the narrowing of the band. So here your conduction band will get narrow and valence band will also get narrow. If they becomes narrow, the energy gap between them is increased. If energy gap increases, we know that this energy is inversely proportional to the absorption wavelength, that is E is equal to hc by lambda. So if your lambda decreases, means your absorption wavelength decreases, and this effect is called as a blue shift. Means in your visible spectra, suppose we have VIBGYOR, in VIBGYOR, violet is your shortest wavelength and reddish is your longer wavelength. So energy increases means your wavelength decreases, so it is shifted towards a blue color. So this phenomenon is called as a blue shift. So normally this is the case for semiconducting materials, but here in metal nanoparticles like gold, we don't have a band gap. We have here surface plasmon resonance, And in surface plasmon resonance also, it is showing decrease in its absorption wavelength, which decreasing the size, and which will change the color of these nanoparticles, and they are having again potential application in sensors. So only I have taken these two characteristics. There are more characteristics or properties that can be useful for different applications. But our today's seminar is basically on sensing technology, and we have so many topics to discuss. So I will not discuss too much about these nanomaterials and nanotechnology. So here we have few applications of nanomaterials. So it can be used uh, in sensing technology that we are going to see in detail. So it is also used in drug delivery. So this silica porous materials are used in which we are loading some drugs and then we are passing through these silica nanoparticles are biocompatible. They can easily accept by bodies and we can send the drugs and it will effectively work inside the body. So in hyperthermia also we are using this nanoparticles. So hyperthermia is basically a technique which is used to treat the cancer patients. So by using nanoparticles, basically super paramagnetic nanoparticles, we are sending it to a cancer cell or nearby cancer cell, and then we are passing a radio frequency on them, and we are hitting them. Normally, there is a window, life window of this cancer cells and healthy cells. So healthy cells normally dies at 46 or above 46 degrees Celsius, and your cancer cells dies at 42 degrees Celsius. So if I increase temperature in such way that it is in between 42 and 46, your cancer cells will get die and your healthy cells will survive. In this way, we can cure the cancer by using this hyperthermia treatment. Then also in energy sectors like solar cells and fuel cells, due to this high surface to volume ratio, we are getting very high catalytic properties, and that is used to enhance the efficiency of the solar cells and fuel. So in nanorobotics also nowadays there are few composite materials which are used with conductive polymers. They are used to or it is working as a robots or fine nanorobots in primary stages. So there are so many videos of this nanorobots you will find on internet. And in spintronics, nowadays this is the era of solid state devices. In solid state devices or solid state memory devices are basically working on spintronics. In spintronics, we are doping magnetic nanoparticles or magnetic atoms into a semiconducting material, or by using the spin of that magnetic nanoparticles with help of your semiconducting property, we can store more energy. So these all solid state devices or solid state memory devices are basically based on this spintronic application. So there is one more concept which is called as metamaterial cloaking. So this is the concept of invisibility. Nowadays, this US defense is using. So they are coating these nanomaterials which are having different or specific nanostructures, and they are actually giving negative refractive indices. So if some material is having negative refractive indices, they are very difficult to detect by radar. So there all the planes are basically coated with these metamaterials, and they are very difficult to detect for enemy or radar of the enemy. So these are, I can say, introduction part about the nanomaterials. So why metal oxide nanomaterials for sensing, or why we are using these metal oxides, okay, for sensing application in nano. As I explained, we have a first property that is surface to volume ratio. The surface of your nanomaterial is very active. So what happens on this pole, most of the metal oxides are having oxygen vacancies, and the oxygen vacancies are forming dangling bonds or unsaturated covalent bonds. And these covalent bonds, unsaturated covalent bonds, are mixed paths for extraction or collection of electrons from the uh, sensing entity to your metal oxide, or from metal oxide to sensing entity, depending upon the electron concentration on both sides. And also at a normal temperature, these metal oxides are also behaving as a semiconducting nature, since these defects are making some trap states in between the band gap, and they are contributing as a conduction electron at the room temperature. So though it is a wide band gap semiconductor, is normally having insulating nature, but these defects makes it a conducting at room temperature. And this high electrical conductivity is very important, because if we have to design some sensor, we require electronic uh, quantity to get travel from one place to another place. So for electronic circuit, it is very important. And this tin oxide nanomaterial is a very promising material since it gives all the properties that have been given on the slides. So this is the first material that people have used for sensing technology or to develop the first chemical sensor or gas sensor. Then we have to see the mechanism of gas sensor or any chemical sensor. So what happens if we have a sensor? So how it senses actually that we are going to see? See, normally what happens, we have a band structure of metal oxide and we have some gas quantity or gas entity like oxygen, nitrogen, carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide or sulfur dioxide that we are going to see. If this gas entity will come in contact with your metal oxide, it will transfer electron from that gas to a metal oxide or from metal oxide to gas depending upon the energy levels. Now see here, simple example I am giving here. The band structure of metal oxides. So here we are having Fermi energy which is present in between or Fermi level which is present in between this conduction band and valence band. What happens here when this gas entity is having these two energy levels, LUMO level and HOMO levels, they are also analogous to this conduction band and valence band. So, LUMO is basically called as a lower unoccupied molecular orbit, and HOMO is called as a highest occupied molecular orbit. So it is just like valence band and conduction. So when this LUMO level is below your Fermi level, normally this electron get transferred from your metal oxide to gas. And if your LUMO level and HOMO level, normally HOMO level is above your Fermi level, the electron will get transferred from this gas entity to the metal oxide. In this way, if more electrons will come from gas entity into a metal oxide, your resistance will decrease since you are getting majority charge carriers for conduction. And if electron get transferred from your metal oxide to gas entity, you will get a depletion region or number of electrons in your metal oxide will be less and its resistance will be decreased. So decrease or increase in resistance is directly proportional to your concentration of the sensing quantity. So here, basically what happens on metal oxide, adsorption of oxygen takes place and this oxygen will extract electron and forming depletion region. So this adsorbed O minus ions will form on the surface and they will now take part in your sensing action. So first your sensing entity or sensing material like all gases will interact with this oxygen and then they will transfer electron to this oxygen and the oxygen will transfer electron to the metal oxide. So this is a simple way where we are getting transfer of electron either from metal sensing material to gas or gas from gas to the sensing material. So if electrons get transferred from your sensing material to gas, that gas is basically oxidizing gas. And if your electron will get transferred from your gas to a sensing material, then that gas entity is normally called as a reducing since there is a abundance of electron present inside the reducing gas. Now here we have a few examples. So people have used tin oxide also, or tungsten oxide, zinc oxide, and MOO3 also for sensing the different gases. So here it is found that these specific materials at specific temperature gives higher sensitivity to these gas entities. So most of the gases, the problem in gas sensors is most of the gases are giving response to all the gases, but there are some selectivity to particular gases. So the surface charge or surface properties will only give good response for particular that we have to do on trial basis also. So here we have few examples and the same mechanism what I explained it is given here in this band structure. So I'm not going to explain it. Today I will tell you that due to extraction of electron, you will get a band bending, upward band bending, which will causes due to a depletion region or increasing the resistivity of your semiconducting material. So these are the actually output that we can see for any gas sensor. So what happens here? Here in left hand side, your resistance, if I input gas or if gas is uh, placed on this sensor, its resistance decreases. So if you see this response time is very small. In a fraction of seconds, you will get the decrease in resistance and it will remain constant since your concentration surrounding the gas sensor is constant. You will get a constant saturation of the resistance, and as well as we remove the gas, again it will come to its original position. So this response and recovery, these two factors will decide whether that sensor is good or not. If response and recovery is very slow, we cannot use that sensor, or it is not said that this sensor is very good in its working application. So here see resistance is decreases. But if you see right hand side, your resistance is increases. So this left hand side, we are having reducing gas sensing like sulfur dioxide or sulfur hydrogen sulfide. These are highly reducing gases for N-type semiconductors. Your metal oxide is basically N-type semiconductor. So here, electron will get transferred from your sulfur dioxide or H2S into your material and it will be decreased. Whereas your right hand side, your resistance will be increased and it will remain constant. And again, as well as soon as we remove the gas, so here you can see gas in and gas out. Gas in is the response time, and gas out you will get the recovery time. So here again we have few examples for repetitive cycles of the gas sensors or the chemical sensor. So here, depending upon the concentration, or if I increase the concentration, you can see the increase in the decrease in the resistance, and in oxidizing it is increasing. So it will decide the sensitivity. So if you increase the concentration of the gas, your sensitivity also increases depending upon the concentration. So if your sensor is working in such a manner, we can use this for your commercial applications. Now this is the work which we are actually performed or developed in our laboratory with my colleagues. So here we have developed SNO2 gas sensor with micro heater on the back side of the sensor. Now see why we are using micro heaters on this gas sensor. So most of these metal oxide sensors are giving very good response or response and recovery at higher temperature. So at the back side of your sensor, we have to design a micro heater, and that micro heater can heat your material more than 350 or 400 or 600 degrees Celsius with very small input voltage like 1 volt or 2 volt. So the design is like this. So here we have selected a substrate which is a support on which is again insulating material, and it can withstand for higher temperature. And on that we have deposited this SNO2 nanoparticles or film of SNO2 oxide. And to measure the resistance of the sample, we have here two contacts, or we can also have 4 contacts. But here, to make it simple, we have taken 2 contacts. And then we have studied its microheater properties. So the sensing properties now it is undergoing, but in microheater properties, we found very promising results. So it is found that if I apply 2 volt, my temperature of entire surface is quite uniform, and it goes up to 50 degrees Celsius or 621 Kelvin. So most of the sensors, SNO2 based sensors, are very good performing at this 350 degrees Celsius, and it is also shown that, or these results also shown that the stress is also very less in the sample at this higher temperature. Normally, what happens if we heat these films? Since film is having a rectangular shape, okay, so the strain is much more higher as compared to a cylindrical shape. So at 350 degrees Celsius, it can withstand, and this glass is also not affected by if I apply this voltage to hit this sensor. So this article we have published in Springer in last year. Then we are going to see there are, I can say, different approaches that can be used for sensing the gases with, I can say, influence sensitivity and selectivity. So there are different morphologies that can be used, like nanowires or nanorods, which will give specific response. Or we can also use a metal doping. So I have worked on metal doping. It is showing that a particular metal doping gives a very higher sensitivity and selectivity for a particular gas. So basically, this metal doping are making catalytic sites for absorption of gases on the surface of the nanoparticle. Then in laser irradiation, if we have a sensor and if we radiate with a laser, high energy laser, pulse laser, it will quench that material, sensing material, and it will form more porous structures as well as very defective structure, and this defective structure will form some specific charge, and that charge can be used to sense a particular gas entity. Then, by using the enzyme immobilization or bioentity, or by using some chemical functionalization. So normally, if we have a sensing material, and on that sensing material, if we put some biomolecules or some chemical organic molecules, they will give very good sensitivity. So these are the different approaches that people are working on nowadays, and they are very recent, which are used to increase the sensitivity and selectivity, that is performance of the sensor. So here I am not going to detail in this work because this work is already published by me in material focus. So here we have taken FeDOP SNO2. So this Fe is ion of SNO2, and we have studied, we have taken three concentrations, one pure SNO2, second one is 1% FeDOP SNO2, and third one is 5% of FeDOP SNO2. And it is found that by using this Raman spectroscopy, effects are much more higher if we increase the uh, doping concentration. So in 1%, effects are much more, or this vacancies are much more, whereas in 5% it is again. So here, this mode, A1G mode, is actually a prominent mode in SNO2, and it will show shift with decreasing the size or increasing the doping concentration. By using doping concentration, your size reduces. Due to reduction in size, the effects are also increases, and it will enhance the sensitivity. But in sensing results, we found that this 5% sample is not giving very good results. Why it happens? Because there is a degree of optimization of the doping concentration. So 1% doping concentration gives you a better adsorption of gas entity on the surface, whereas this 5% gives saturation, so adsorption is very poor in that case. So sensitivity is nearly equal to pure SNO2. But if I take 1%, my sensitivity is really very high. So this is the advantage by using a doping of transition metals in the uh, semiconductors or metal oxides. So this is all about chemical sensors. Now we have to see a biosensor. So biosensors are basically consisting of some sensing material. On that sensing material, we are putting, or I can say immobilizing, or we are attaching some biomolecules. See, most of the bioentities or viruses or bacteria or antibodies or nucleic acids that can be only sensed if we have some receptor or biomolecule is there. Otherwise, it will not give a reaction. So what we are doing, first we are uh, attaching this biomolecule on sensing material, and then the sensor is transducing that quantity. So it can be electrical transducing, or it can be a optical transducing, or it can be a magnetic or colorimetric transducing. So after transducing, we are converting that uh, quantity, sensing quantity, into some known signals, and then we can display. So we can convert this electrical quantity like resistance or current or voltage or capacitance into a concentration of that sensing quantity. So this is the basic structure of biosensors, in which we are having for sensing material. On that sensing material, we are having immobilizing biomolecules like antibodies, enzymes, or cells or bacteria, which will sense particular body, and then it will get transduced by using some electrical or optical or magnetic strategy. So here, this is my work actually of glucose sensing. So we have deposited SNO2 nanoparticles or thin film of SNO2 on alumina substrate. This alumina substrate is porous, and then we immobilize glucose oxidase enzyme. So see this, if glucose oxidase enzyme is not there, we cannot sense the glucose which is present in the diabetic patient. So what we have done, we have immobilized this GOX, that is glucose oxidase enzyme, or we coated, you can simply say we coated this GOX enzyme on the surface, and then after coating this or after functionalization, we have put some glucose concentration with different concentration on this assembly, and we tested the resistance of this sensor by using four-probe resistivity method. So here basically this glucose, if it will interact with this enzyme, that is glucose oxidase GOX enzyme, it will oxidize glucose into gluconic acid, and at the same time the oxygen which is present nearby this glucose, normally we are having water-based solutions, so oxygen present in this surrounding the OX, it is again converting into hydrogen peroxide. So at the same time, this oxygen will get converted to hydrogen peroxide and glucose will get converted into gluconic acid. So during that reaction, the two electrons are get transferred into this SNO2 phosphate. The electron get transferred from this enzyme into a sensor. Resistance of your sensor is decreases, and concentration of glucose is directly proportional to the decrease in the resistance of the sensor. So I can detect this glucose in the form of electron by using this enzyme. If enzyme is not there, it will be very difficult. So here we have the uh, properties, or I can say characterizations like X-ray, which confirms this structure is SNO2 or aluminum, and this is a surface morphology where by, or these are also called as AFM or atomic force micrographs of our tin oxide, which are having elliptical granules of size of 80 nanometer and the roughness of 10 nanometer. So if roughness is more adsorption will be there on the surface and it will sense the gas entity, sorry, a glucose entity. So here we have a result, and this work is published few years ago in Applied Physics Letters. Again, this is my work. So here we found that if I increase the glucose enzyme concentration or glucose oxide oxidase concentration, it is found that the sensitivity also increases with increasing the glucose concentration. So these are actually my work that I want to explain in front of you. Now we have to see a very novel approaches. Let me see the time. Yes. So I will try to cover this topic in a remaining time. So in this approach of COVID-19, we know that nowadays this is a very problematic issue, okay, in front of all humanity. So this COVID-19 was discovered in Hubei province, I think in Wuhan city in China in 2019. And in 2-3 months, it spread out all over the world. And the spreading ratio of this virus, this one person if get affected or infected by this COVID-19 virus or SARS-CoV-2 virus, it will affect 3 persons at least. So the average spreading rate is 3.28. And since this virus is RNA-based virus, this virus will transmit very fast throughout the person to person. And we know that there is no uh, constructive or I can say conclusive vaccine or drugs that are under trial. Due to that, we have so many deaths. So until today, we have 654,000 deaths, which is a really worrying factor in today's scenario. So to sense now how we can sense this COVID-19 virus, or it is also called as a SARS-CoV-2 virus. So there are one bat virus which is also called as the SARS-CoV-1 virus, but this is having 96% similarity with that virus, but 4% dissimilarity. So they are saying this is a new virus, and this virus is called as a SARS-CoV-2 virus. So if you see the structure of this virus, okay, so the size of this virus is about 125 nanometer, in which the outer part is mostly composed of these proteins, and the size of the width of these proteins is of the order of 20 nanometer, and inner part is of the order of 100 nanometer. And this outer part is basically consists of these proteins, which are also called as the E proteins, N proteins, N proteins, and S proteins. So these proteins are responsible in the replication of this virus. So inside this proteins, we have a membrane, and in that membrane we have a in that membrane, or we have a kind of nucleus fluid inside this virus, and it is having RNA. So this is a mainly RNA virus, and this detection of RNA virus is very difficult, and transmission is very fast. So here, what is important to detect this virus is this spike protein S1 and S2 units. So this S1 and S2 units are basically responsible, okay, to transfer from one body to another. What happened now basically, this spike protein is normally is having tentacle shapes, and this protein will interact with the antibody of human cell. So there are abundance ACE2 antibodies present in the human, and they will interact with this antibody, and then it will transmit or invade into a human body or human cells. So if we target this spike to protein, if we detect this spike to protein, we can easily find out the whether that uh, virus is there or not, or whether patient is infected by that virus or not. And there are also these member protein antibodies are also available, or people have isolated, and by using this spike protein uh, antibodies and membrane antibodies. Antibodies is basically a protein. It is again a protein which is normally developed into a human body or human cells due to uh, introduction of this COVID-19 virus or antigen. So if some antigen or virus come into your body, okay, your antibodies are being created. And these antibodies are reacting with these spike proteins or this number of proteins. And they will interact with each other and then it will transmit into the body. So our first, I can say, target is to sense these outer proteins in which this spike protein or S1, it is also called as S protein or glycoprotein, which we can sense with ACE2 antibody, and that can be used to detect uh, this COVID-19 virus. So we have to see now what are the existing tools in the market. So this is first fundamental tool, okay, from many years this biologists or biochemists are using, which is called as a RT-PCR technique, or it is also called as a reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. So what happened normally here, we are first taking the sample from this patient, and then we are extracting RNA samples or RNA from it, and this RNA then we are amplifying by growing at certain temperatures or by using some nutrient media. And then after amplification of this virus, of this RNA, then we are converting them into a complementary DNA. So I'm not biologist, but here I can simply say this RNA can be get converted into this complementary DNA, and then this amplification of this DNA, complementary DNA, okay, is used for fluorescence. So if you study fluorescence of this DNA at particular wavelength, they will give you a good intensity. So if intensity is very good, we can say the person is infected with that virus, and if it is not there, so we can say that there is no DNA, which is basically due to this COVID-19. But there are disadvantages of this method. The first disadvantage, this method, though it is fundamental and very constructive method, but it is time consuming. It takes hours. It takes also 24 hours to get proper results. If there is a contamination in the samples, it leads to a detection. And sometimes what happens, if your immune system is very strong, okay, this virus will attack on your immune system and it will avoid replication of your RNA, and probably then it will not convert to DNA. In that case, it is problematic whether though patient is infected with COVID-19, but we cannot get a good result by using this technique, which is RT-PCR. Okay, now the CT scan method. So normally, okay, most of the doctors or radiologists are using this technique. So in CT scan, they are taking multiple X-rays of your chest or lungs, and this all the uh, X-rays, they are combined together by using a image processing, and then you are getting some uh, final image, and that final image is then compared with the healthy CT scan of the patient. So in this, the problem is most of the respiratory diseases are giving this kind of structure. So it is very difficult whether this person is infected by COVID-19 or not. But we can use this as a supplementary or complementary with your constructive like RT-PCR technique. So in, suppose patient is get positive in RT-PCR, by using this CT scan, we will get how much infection is there. So if you compare these two, now again, here we require a radiologist expertise to uh, get how much actually the infection present inside the lungs. Then we have another very, I can say, a famous kit that we can say nowadays in a market, which is based on this, or this kit is basically working on a biochemical detection kit, or that is also called as a ELISA kit. In ELISA kit, it is also called as an enzyme linked immunosorbent assay. So here, what happens? We have antibody, which is I can say working as a receptor or responsive to your antigen or virus. What happens is we have this antibody, or antibodies are basically having Y-shaped protein. These bi-shaped proteins or antibodies will interact with antigen, and this antigen means your virus, and it will form some conjugation. And again, this conjugation will interact with some detector antibody. This detector antibody, again, it is making reaction with some uh, enzyme linked antibody. So here, this final conjugation of your antibody with your virus, and again detector antibody and enzyme linked antibody will have a interaction, and this interaction, if we place some substrate material, normally there are some phosphate groups. If we or if these phosphate groups are present here, this assembly will convert into a particular color, and by using that color, if we are getting that particular color with high intensity, we can say that this virus is present there and its concentration is also very high. So this is, I can say, a mostly used technique. And based on that technique, nowadays in market, we have this standard Q COVID-19 AG kit. So nowadays people are using this kit. So this kit is again based on the same principle, that is ELISA test. So here we are doing different antibodies. So here we can use a multiple antibodies. In multiple antibodies, that can sense the multiple uh, proteins like glycoproteins or S proteins or envelope proteins. So these different proteins we can detect, and these proteins are actually giving some color. So here we have some control and testing. So in control, we have already this kind of mechanism which we are going to take with this sample. If the reaction with your sample of COVID patient will give the same reaction, you will get the same color. So if this color control line is giving you a red color, and at the same time, if that interaction that I have explained in ELISA test will also takes place, we will get the red color in the testing, and we can say that person is infected with COVID-19. So this is one of the, I can say, most or widely used techniques by our doctors, because it gives a very fast response, and normally we are taking the swab from the nose. So these are the standard techniques nowadays people are using. Okay, so there is a one indirect method in which we have a contact tracing software. So this software is working basically if there are two persons in a home, and this person is traveling through a train to his workplace, and he's coming in contact with so many persons. So suppose next day the person found COVID positive. So these all persons are having that software, and they will get message that this person is a COVID positive. If this is a COVID positive, these all persons will uh, get self-quarantine, or they will get cautious, and they will take care to not spreading it. So this is very effective technique to stop the virus. So here we are using GPS technology and some software which will decrease the spreading of this virus. So this is again very effective, but it is not detecting your virus, but it is stopping your virus. Nowadays, so we have this number of systems available in a market, okay, in today's scenario. So I'm here going to give you some examples, okay, which are under trial, and these are basically a biosensors. So here, if you consider, these viruses are basically binding to this spike protein, to this H2 antibody. So if I have this H2 antibody, if I functionalize this H2 antibody on my electronic sensor, this will interact with the spike protein, and it will transfer some electrons. Similar assembly I can do with amino acids also. So there are few reports which are saying this cysteine and threonine amino acids, if we interact with these gold nanoparticles, they can have interaction with COVID-19. Or if we use some formation of charged particles by using this nanoparticles, or if we have nanoparticles, and if we have organic molecules which will uh, coated on these nanoparticles, and if they have some interaction with this nanoparticle, why not to use this nanoparticle? Why not to use this strategy to sense the COVID-19 virus? Or if we have some porous nanostructures, if these nanostructures, porous sizes are in such way that they are complementary with your COVID-19 virus, So if I put sample on it, only COVID-19 viruses will interact or will entrap into this porous structures, and it will give some particular response in sensing. So these are the, I can say, receptors or functionalized groups that can be interact with the sensor. So now in electronic approach, see most of the electronic approach, people have worked on it. So there are few reports in ACS Nano. This is again a prestigious journal in this nanotechnology or nanosensing or biosensing applications. So there are so many trials has been done on this graphene nanostructure. What they have done, they have taken a graphene, and on this graphene they functionalize these antibodies. So when this antibody is functionalized with this graphene, and when this antibody will interact with your virus, it will transfer electron from this virus to antibody and then to a graphene nanotubes or graphene carbon structure. So this transfer of electron can be utilized by using this FET, that is field effect transistor, or electrochemical. Uh, Normally, we are taking redox reaction in this approach, or 4-pro, where we are taking a resistivity of this film or surface of the film. Okay, so first we can conjugate antibody on the surface, and then interaction of this antibody with this virus will give some electron transfer, and that electron transfer can be used to save the virus. So this approach, okay, so there are so many approaches with different antibodies has been done. So I have given these two examples, which are more promising. So here, the advantages of this electronic approach or optical approach is that we are getting very fast response, and the device size is also very small. Due to that, your cost is also very less. Now see, we are targeting on the cost. If cost is very less, your most of the population in the world, okay, they are below this purity line. So for them, this is very important. So if the cost is low, we can have a mass production, and we can couple these sensors with the smart devices like smartphones or wireless devices. So this is one approach. So another approach, this is my own approach. What I'm thinking is, if we have a quad strips, and if I uh, functionalize antibodies on these quad strips, now why quad strips? I will simply tell you. Quad strips, if we are using a spectroscope like UVB spectrometer, these quads will have less absorption. So the substrate absorption will be less here. What happens here, if you have antibody and if you put sample of COVID-19 on this antibody, it will have some interaction. After that interaction, if I wash out the sample and if I test it for UV spectroscopy, or if I put this sample for absorbance, okay, so this absorbance is basically giving you a baseline correction. So this signal will get subtract from this antibody. Whatever output I will get, it is only due to this COVID-19 absorption. So in absorption spectrometer, we are having two windows. So at one end we can keep this, and another window we can have this COVID-19, or by using single slide also we can have baseline correction. This we are taking for this spectra, and then we can take this another spectra, and if automatically it can subtract, and finally we get absorbance for that particular COVID. So this is again a very effective approach, but we require here a spectrometer. So these are some innovative approaches that we can use to find out or detect the COVID. So this is all about this uh, detection of the biosensors of sensors by using it. So thank you very much for listening. If there are few questions, you are most welcome.
Thank you, Sandeep sir, for
Yes,
such
I
an
can hear
Amol
you.
Mane here, that he wants to ask you. He
Yes,
wants to
ma'am, please talk.
Yes. So we have a question here from Mr. Amol Mane.
Yes, ma'am.
He wants to ask that in India, as seasons are changing, what is the effect of humidity on the performance of metal oxides and how we can overcome it?
Yes, I can say this is the main problem due to humidity. What happens is you are getting a very less response or recovery of these sensors. So in that sense, Normally, most of these metal oxide sensors are working with the micro heater or heater at the backside of the sensor. So at heating, what happens is this humidity will get evaporate and your sensor is giving good response. So most of these metal oxide based sensors at room temperature, it is very difficult due to this humidity issue only. But if we use the heaters, okay, it gives very good response.
Okay, sir. Thank you. So one more question is there, which I want to ask. According to you, I just want a general aspect on the the thing that how your nano biosensors or nanotechnology is going to impact healthcare systems in future. What applications nano biosensors can have, like what is the most effective application of the nanotechnology in healthcare systems in coming future?
Yes, yes, a very good question. And as I explained you, if you see the most of the properties of nanomaterials, like optical properties or magnetic properties. So the main domain nowadays is super paramagnetic nanoparticles are used to detect or to cure the cancer cells. So hyperthermia application. So in hyperthermia application, we are actually coupling these nanoparticles with your cancer cell, and then we are using radio frequency waves, we are hitting these materials or we are actually destroying these cells. So nowadays so many work is going on this applications. And in nanobio also, if you see, most of the sensors nowadays are based on this nanomaterials due to its promising properties, due to high surface area, and uh, blue shift also is there, or magnetic properties are also completely different. So nowadays, I can say most of your technologies in biomedical field also are based on this nanomaterials.
Okay, sir. Thanks a lot, sir, for your well-defined answers to the questions. Uh, Thank you for that. Over to you, Anupama ma'am.
Okay, thank you for a very informative session, Dr. Dhoble. And with your apt explanation, you have rounded it off very well. And thank you for the questions also, Dr. Namrata Singh. So it was very informative and I'm sure very useful for our viewers. And now it is time to thank the people who helped us to conduct this webinar other than the team. I would like to show and express my extreme gratitude to our management, Dr. D.Y. Patil sir, our beloved Dada and founder chancellor of the Dr. D.Y. Patil deemed to be University, and Dr. Vijay D. Patil sir, our current chancellor, for having propelled us in this direction of gaining and giving knowledge and information through this webinar series. I also thank Shivani Patil madam, for her constant encouragement in all these endeavors. And I also thank Dr. Mukesh D. Patil sir, our principal of Ramravadik Institute of Technology, for guiding us in all these endeavors by providing his insights wherever required. And my thanks are due also to our head of the Department of Engineering Sciences, Dr. Arpita Pal Chaudhary Madam, for helping us, being there with us and constantly providing encouragement whenever we are beginning with a new webinar. Thank you for all your support. And last but not the least, I must thank the social media team family to which I too belong, and to the entire team of social media who help us, including Prashant Jadhav sir, Narendra Dasre sir, Sandeep Dhoble sir, and Namrata Singh madam, for constantly being on high alert and helping us to churn out webinar after webinar every Thursday for our department. Thank you. And so I sign off today, promising to come with more webinars in the coming days. Please take care. Thank you and have a good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, ma'am.